Welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So I am making some abstract art postcards. I cut 300 GSM watercolour paper, A5 size, in half to create A6 size postcards. Now, I was watching Laura Denny, who does a lot of abstract art on the jelly plate and on paper. She uses a lot of mixed media as well. So she suggested just doing lots of loopy lines continuous line on paper and then cutting them up and using them as a kind of starting point for a composition for abstract art. And I thought, oh, that is genius. So that's what I've done here. I'm using also a dark brown soft pastel and a minty green, I think it's called lime green actually, oil pastel to make my starting lines with. Now, I chose these because the dark brown has a very dark value and the lime green has a very light value. I've also taken a black and white photograph of my watercolours, soft pastels and oil pastels so that I can just look up in front of me and see what the values of the colours are. And as long as I stay organised and tidy, that will stand me in good stead and be very helpful going forward. So it will encourage me to remain tidy. Now, this is out of the Kuretake Art Nouveau watercolour set and it is Venetian red, beautiful colour. And what's happened is when it's met the soft pastel, it's made some of that soft pastel wet and it's brought this lovely dark brown shade into the Venetian red watercolour. This is now, I'm sure it's Mars yellow. I will list all the supplies I use in the description. And this is shadow green. Now, what I'm doing just now is, so the areas I made with the lines, I'm almost block colouring the areas in that had been created by those lines. This is pale aqua or pale blue. And I love how it just bled into the shadow green there. I had dried the red and the orange before applying the blue and the green. What I do is I spin the video to indicate drying time. So this is an unusual palette for me, but I thought to myself, that Kuretake Art Nouveau palette, I get the feeling it's made in such a way that all the colours really are compatible in some way to each other. I also chose them by value as well as by colour. So I used a burnt sienna oil pastel and I just drew the outline of the Venetian red shape. And I thought, well, I don't like that. So I'm putting some white acrylic paint on top. As the acrylic paint dries, the oil pastel colour does start to bleed through again, but that's fine. It helps subdue it at least. So I'm doing some sgraffito here with the end of a paintbrush, a palette knife, maybe something else. I think I just mainly use that. So this is me starting to kind of try and add a bit of texture and also use the fact that there's oil pastel underneath the acrylic paint to my advantage to start deciding what I want showing and what I don't. Now, this is a very bright red out of the Kuretake watercolour set, the Art Nouveau. Not sure what colour it is, but it was a bold choice. It actually worked out very well in the end. I also will say as well, I have 8 postcards here, and normally I would do a full process video where I will show you them all. But what I've done is I've shown you every process that I do, but I've not shown you on every postcard. So while every colour I use is there and, you know, every sort of technique, I suppose, And I treat all the postcards the same, like I go round them all as a group at a time. For the sake of the video, I have, only shown 1 or 2 postcards being worked on for each technique or colour. I made that sound much more complicated than it is. So all of me is wanting to make bigger, braver, bolder decisions when it comes to the artwork, which is why I've chosen this palette. I mean, I think this is the first time I've used that red watercolour because it is very strong, and normally I go for the blues and the greens and the yellows. So so I'm wanting to make bigger and bolder choices. I'm wanting to try new things. I also do a lot more layering this time than I normally do, which is why I've cut the video down to just showing 1 or 2 postcards at a time. So that was a sort of mid-brown grey, soft pastel. And now I'm going back in with the saffron yellow watercolour. Now this, I think I should have watered it down a bit more than I did because it almost finished with a kind of shiny look to it. I think it looks like a big mushroom there, and that looks like a bottle. I'm also using it over the acrylic paint, and while the watercolour obviously struggles to stick to the acrylic paint, it sticks in the areas where I've kind of scraped off a bit. And it doesn't like the oil pastel, it doesn't stick in the oil pastel at all. And if I use a heavy enough amount of the watercolour, parts of it will sit on top of the watercolour. Now here what I do is I want to try and graduate the end, so I've just put some water on the end of that paintbrush. And do you see some of the reds bled into it? And then I'm trying to tilt it. I actually fold it a little bit, or unfold it a little bit. There we go. Just so that it doesn't sit in a big puddle in the middle. So I end up using that sort of orangey Mars yellow and this saffron yellow. I do end up using quite a lot of it, but we do resolve it at the end. But for a while it was very overwhelming, and I did think, oh, there's no coming back from this. But the paper actually was able to take a lot of wear and tear. It was able to take a lot of sgraffito. So this is me bringing out the lime green oil pastel again that we used at the beginning. And so now what I'm doing is I'm almost using... So we started off with lines, and those lines made shapes. And then we made more shapes from those shapes. And now I'm coming back in with some more line work. And what I do is I kind of connect shapes together to make new shapes. Or I just maybe enhance a shape that's already there. It's just a lot of, I call it the dance, because that's what it's like. And the further you go into the picture, as in the longer you're doing it, the more you're adding, the bigger the dance gets, the more backwards and forwards that you go. I mean, I've put on a half-hour video. I had 3 hours, more than 3 hours of video to go through to edit down to half an hour. And that's not including drying time as well. I'm liking at the moment the sort of clean lines and shapes that we have mixed in with some of the sort of rougher edges and, rougher textures in some of the shapes due to the sgraffito or the use of the acrylic paint, or the fact that we've got watercolour over acrylic paint or oil pastel or whatever. So we are starting to gather interest because of the variety, because I'm trying to think of opposites. I'm trying to use opposites, so I'm trying to use dark and light values with some midtones. I'm trying to use different media to give different looks. And I'm trying to apply them with different tools. So I start off applying this with a makeup sponge, and it's too dark. I think this was a cerulean blue acrylic paint with a little bit of white acrylic paint. I add in more. I use the colour shaper. This blue was a bit of a choice that I regretted, but I continued to go with. I didn't regret the big bold red, but I do kind of think this colour wasn't overly correct for it. But what we do is we've made our choice and we work with it. I do like there's a brightness to these pictures and that I really like, and it's not. While I often feel like I make quite bright, colourful artwork, I feel this is a new level of bright, colourful artwork. But I also like, some of them have a bit of a landscape look to them. And I like on the bottom row, second from the left, that purple square under the kind of bottle, the way that that's slanting, I almost feel like it's starting to create a bit of a 3D look to it. And I use that. Later on, I do a lot more sort of geometric shapes on top of it to give the illusion of different planes, as in you're looking at it from different directions, or you're looking at a less flat picture. I also like that we've used the same colours and the same tools, same techniques on each of the postcards, but we've got very different scenes, but they still work together as a series. The skewer, that was the other thing I'd pulled out. I changed to the palette knife. Now you can see there at the edge, it's starting to make the edge almost like a rug with little tassels hanging from it, you know that? And I thought, I don't know why I don't do more of this. So I do a lot of it. And then I'm using the back of the palette knife to sort of flatten it down so that the scratches are, the parts of the scratches are filled back in with some of the oil pastel. Now I'm also, while I liked the kind of tasseled edge, I'm trying to take some of it away and make it sharp in areas. So I'm trying to have a mix. I'm experimenting. I'm just trying different ways of making it. The thing with the oil pastel is I can always add more into it. I can fill the lines back up, no problem. Now in the paint, I found this a bit of a struggle because what I found with the acrylic paint with the oil pastel underneath, it makes very, very deep, raggedy score lines. And in my head, all I could think of was, why are you doing stripes continuously? Why are you not doing other types of mark making? But no, I stuck to the stripes. I think it's the stripes. I think it's maybe the shape of the tool that I was using. I think I'm going to need to look out some other kind of mark making tools to use in the oil pastels, you know, when I'm using it with like the acrylic paint, the watercolour, etc., just to help encourage me make different types of marks. Because while I'm making different depths of marks and different widths, I am very much just making lines with it. So remember I said about there's a lot of that marge yellow and saffron yellow on here, so the kind of orange and yellow colours. So I thought, right, let's try and tone this down. And I used the soft pastel, a kind of beige colour, but when I wet it, it just disappeared. So, but wetting it reactivated the watercolour, which meant I actually could remove it with tissue. It left behind a beautiful beige. And then I went through the Prussian blue oil pastel with it. Oh, I did some line work with Prussian blue oil pastel just previous to this, and I never pressed record in the video and I forgot to tell you I did it. I did some Prussian blue line work. You can see it. It's a very dark value. I think this one's looking a bit cartoony. And I think the shadow green it's starting to look out of place and with the other colours that are being used. Earlier on, it didn't look out of place. I think since I've used that cerulean blue acrylic paint, it looks out of place. So this is a pale yellow oil pastel, and I used a lot of it trying to cover this up. And then I score into it as well. So this is the dance continuing. It's the further into the picture you go, the more time each layer takes, because it's not the actual putting down, it's the decision making. It takes a long time. That doesn't get reflected in the video. I have tried to show parts where, you know, there is decision making, but it's a hard thing to show because you don't, obviously the video would be very boring if I showed all the decision making processes, but there is a lot. I sit and I look at it for ages before I actually do anything to the page. I did a wavy line here, I quite liked that. And I think because I was making the line wavy as well, that I pressed less hard. So I'm doing more line work now, and this is olive brown. It's not a darker value as the Prussian blue, but you know, it's a pretty dark value. And I'm starting to look at more triangular shapes to add. Well, I was thinking of a bit of tension, because triangles and the diagonal shapes are associated with a bit of tension. But also, because of what I said earlier about underneath the bottle shape, the purple square was at a slant. And I thought, I want to explore that further. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. And this takes a long time, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to imagine. I'm joining a kind of point of a shape to the point of another shape, but I'm trying to decide what shapes it actually would be helpful to join together, like that would give an interesting look to it. I don't want to just join all the points together so that they look like a spirograph or something. And also, I'm not talking just about using the shapes that are very obvious. I'm talking about maybe some shapes that are less obvious. So maybe where, you know, a transparent paint has been used over another shape, or there's been some, you know, sgraffito done on it, so it's removed part of it. I actually do think this was a really good way to move forward. I struggle with getting past the kind of layering down, you know, the first few layers. It's kind of, where do you go from there to make it a more interesting picture? And I do think that this was one way to do it. I've tried to leave some bits in where you can see that I go to draw a line and then I don't, and I'm turning the picture a lot. You know, and I'm even putting the pictures back and then I'm bringing them out again. I do that with most of the layers, actually. You know, you kind of put the colour on and then you'll go back to it. So like that one kind of makes me think of a chair with a point at the bottom. So here what I've done, I've brought out some burnt sienna paint, some of the fluid soft body paint, and I've mixed it in with glazing medium. And I did that just to make it more transparent, because I can be very heavy-handed with the glazes. And what I'm doing is I'm using it to block out areas, so almost bringing a few of the shapes that have been created, bringing them together as a form. Would that be a form? Would that be basically you're bringing a lot of shapes together under the kind of one colour, but there's still all the different colours underneath, and obviously the different textures and brush strokes, sgraffito, etc. So glazing, I think, is one area that I need to spend a lot more time on, because I need to understand more about how to make the paints more transparent, about, you know, what's the best way to use a glaze? You know, is it something that you should consider using quite often throughout? I know if you put on transparent layers of paints, you could say that's a glaze. But I'm using it in a way to try and kind of bring cohesion to parts of the picture. And that's the part I'm thinking about. Now, I've read that adding a small amount of white to the glaze can be helpful at brightening the picture. I chose the burnt sienna because of the value of it. It's not a dark value, but it's got some darkness. It's more of a mid-tone value, really. A darker mid-tone value. So yeah, I always think as well that a glaze is supposed to help finish the picture, bring it together. And the thing as well, I'm noticing with the glazing medium that I'm using, that it's very, very difficult to hide brush marks. And I feel if I'm putting down a glaze that I don't want it to add more texture to the painting. I want the glaze there almost as a kind of, to give it more of a professional look and more of a finished look. So, long story short, I'm going to see what else I can find out about glazes and about how to use them. So I'm at a point here where I'm thinking, right, we're getting towards the finish. Because I feel like if I added in much more shapes or lines, if I added any more bold kind of marks, did anything that changed it too much, then, you know, we're going to lose what we've got already. And I don't think the paper could handle much more big changes. So what I've done is I've taken a photograph of the pictures in black and white, and I'm using them to try and think about how to balance the values. And that's another thing that I want to learn more about, is about how to balance the values, but also how to use them to create focal points. I know you put the darkest value and the lightest value together, you know, at the bit you want to be the focal point. But I'm sure they add a lot more to the picture than just, you know, being the point for the focal point. So actually, whilst I'm saying I'm just putting on the finishing touches here, this takes a very long time. So that light brown soft pastel that I'm using there, you can see that it's got a fairly light mid-tone value, and I feel like the kind of bottom, there's a big yellow band in the middle, and these two areas that are quite landscape-like are not connecting to each other. So I'm hoping that that light brown soft pastel will just be enough to provide that connection. I think it will be. I also do a lot of faffing about down here, because what I'm trying to do is I don't want the eye going too much towards the sides of the picture. So I'm trying to almost mute that a bit and make that a bit more mid-tone round the edges. In my mind, that makes sense to keeping the eyes on the picture and not to stray out. But if I'm wrong, please tell me. Or if there's a better way to do that, please tell me. And again, what I'm trying to do as well is I'm also looking at the colours, and I'm thinking, you know, I want to balance them out as well. Like the mint green, lime green, sorry. That and the purple oil pastel were used very near the start. And I kind of want to make sure that there's enough balance of them throughout the picture. I find as well that I spend a lot of time on these minor details when there's something about the picture that just doesn't sit right and I can't work out what it is. And in this case, it's that kind of light brown square just there that I'm putting this burnt sienna paint on top of. It was like a big block that served no purpose, and it didn't even give it a quiet area. It fell out of place. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get rid of the kind of texture that was on it. So I'm using a makeup sponge. All that did was enhance it. So then I think, right, okay, the join between that and the yellow it's awkward. It's not, I feel like it should be more of a gradual line rather than a sharp one. So what I end up doing is I do some scraping into it, and that helps blend it in. And then I feel like, right, okay, we're nearly finished. Do you see the difference that's made, just that? So I think that has helped a fair bit because it's brought some of the yellow into that solid shape. And so you can see that it's connected them. And then, do you remember the red that I used, the bold red colour? Well, I have an orangey red, more red, oil pastel. And I used that, and I found that really, really helped make a big difference. Because that bold red was a big feature, and it's kind of got lost in amongst the oranges and the yellows and that blue paint that I used. And bringing that back to the forefront again and making very solid shapes with it, I think just brought these alive. And it was just what was needed to finish it. I think you do a lot of sort of faffing about and kind of touching up because you know there's something but you just don't know what it is. So for me it was that solid shape, but it was really this red. So this is the final pictures. I showed you it in black and white to see the values. And so those first two were my favourite. I really like these two. And then they're a bit scrappy after that. But you know what? I was still very happy with them. So I hope you enjoyed. And I hope to see you again soon. And take care. Bye.